Not every time it's the bad guy who snapped. Sometimes the hero is the problem. From almost getting people killed to risking the entire multiverse, here are the times heroes went way too far. Starting with Woody from Toy Story.
He's there, just keep looking toward
Who almost gets Buzz killed out of pure jealousy. And the crazy part is, you can actually understand why he snapped. For context, Woody had been Andy's favorite toy for years. He slept next to him every night, got carried around everywhere, had his name written on his boot. Like, being Andy's favorite wasn't just something Woody enjoyed, it was his entire identity. That's who he was, the leader of the room, the most important toy in Andy's life. And then, out of nowhere, Buzz Lightyear shows up and completely destroys that in a matter of days. Suddenly, Andy's obsessed with space stuff. Buzz gets the spot on the bed, picked first for playtime, everything Woody once had. Meanwhile, Woody's getting shoved to the bottom of the toy chest while trying way too hard to pretend everything's still normal. And honestly, that anxiety is relatable. When someone new walks into a space you've owned for years and instantly becomes everyone's favorite, yeah, that stings. Woody desperately tries to hold on to control by calling meetings, reminding everyone he's still the leader, and acting passive-aggressive toward Buzz. But underneath all of that is just insecurity. He's terrified of being replaced. But then comes the moment where he goes way too far. When Andy's mom says Andy can only bring one toy to Pizza Planet, Woody realizes there's a very real chance he's getting left behind again. So he comes up with a plan. The original idea was simple: knock Buzz behind the desk so Andy can't find him, then Woody gets to go instead. And that alone is already messed up, because even if Woody didn't plan to throw Buzz out the window, he was still willing to sabotage him just to stay Andy's favorite. That jealousy completely overrides his judgment, and then the whole thing spirals out of control when Buzz gets launched straight out the window. At that point, it stops being some petty rivalry and turns into a complete disaster. Buzz could have been lost forever, and in Toy Story logic, a toy getting stranded outside with no kid to return to is basically a death sentence. Woody understood that better than anyone. But what really makes the moment worse is Woody's reaction afterward. Yeah, he panics, but his first instinct is still to try convincing everyone it was an accident while the other toys stare at him in absolute horror. And honestly, the toys turning on Woody is one of the most satisfying moments in the movie because they had every right to be furious, especially Mr. Potato Head.
Andy starts playing with me more, Woody, huh? You're gonna knock me out of the window too?
From their perspective, Woody's jealousy got so out of control that another toy nearly died because of it. Now, to be fair, the movie absolutely gives him a redemption arc afterward. The second half is Woody realizing how selfish he became and eventually risking his life to save the same toy he tried to get rid of. That growth is what makes him such a great character. But I'm just saying, even if throwing Buzz out the window was accidental, Woody still caused the entire situation because he couldn't handle being replaced. That's an insane crash out for a Pixar hero. Woody lets jealousy completely take over and nearly gets another toy killed. Merida does the same, but out of emotional desperation.
I want a spell to change my mum. That'll change my fate.
Okay, so Merida's situation definitely deserves some context first, because she's not just randomly acting out for no reason. Her mother, Queen Eleanor, basically has her entire future planned out like it's some royal checklist. She's expected to sit properly, act properly, marry the correct person, and just accept that her whole life has already been decided for her. And to be honest, being told who you're gonna marry before you're even old enough to fully figure out who you are is genuinely unfair. So yeah, Merida being frustrated makes complete sense. But then the movie hits the giant okay, you went way too far button. After a massive argument with her mother about the marriage contest, Merida completely snaps. Instead of trying to work things out, she storms out of the castle in blind anger and rides deep into the forest. And somehow this leads her to a witch living alone in the woods after she follows these mysterious blue wisps that just appear out of nowhere. And here's the thing, Merida does not approach this situation with even a tiny amount of caution. She walks into this creepy shack, meets a bizarre old woman she knows absolutely nothing about, and immediately asks for a spell to change her mother so she can change her own fate. She doesn't ask what the spell actually does, whether there are side effects or how dangerous it could be. Nothing. She offers to buy the witch's entire stock of wood carvings in exchange for the spell, gets handed this suspicious enchanted cake and just goes, yeah, this seems fine. And then she gives the cake to her mother without fully knowing what it's actually gonna do.
Stop it. Get some help.
That is some next level insane behavior. Your mother is not a test subject. You can't just feed someone enchanted cake because you're mad at them, especially when it came from a witch living deep in the woods. But somehow it gets worse. The second Eleanor eats the cake, she immediately starts coughing, choking, collapsing onto the floor in pain, and clearly something is going horribly wrong. And Merida's first reaction is still talking about the marriage.
How do you feel about the marriage now?
Merida?
Like, come on. Your mom is literally collapsing in front of you, and she's still trying to argue her side instead of immediately realizing how badly she messed up. Then the spell fully kicks in and transforms Eleanor into a giant bear, which is basically a death sentence in this kingdom. Merida knows her father, King Fergus, is completely obsessed with hunting bears. The castle is practically decorated with dead bear heads. So by turning her mother into one, Merida accidentally puts her directly in danger from the one person most likely to kill her on sight. And while all of this chaos is happening, the kingdom itself is falling apart too. The four clans are still gathered at the castle. Tensions are already high because of the marriage situation, and now the queen has mysteriously vanished with no explanation. So Merida's one reckless decision doesn't just endanger her mother, it nearly throws the entire kingdom into political chaos. That's what really makes this one so bad. Merida was so desperate to escape responsibility and force things to go her way that her common sense completely shut down. She trusted a random forest witch, fed her mother unknown magic, ignored every possible warning sign, and somehow thought this would all magically solve itself. Now, to be fair, she does fix things in the end, and she genuinely regrets what she did. But the whole, I didn't know what the spell would do defense only goes so far when you fed your mom cursed mystery cake from a woodland witch and expected everything to magically work out. Merida risks her kingdom trying to change her future, and Miles risks the multiverse trying to change his. Miles ignoring every warning to save his father isn't actually totally wrong, but the problem is that the second things become personal, he completely stops thinking rationally. So the whole canon event in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is honestly horrifying when you really think about it. Miguel explains that spider people across the multiverse are connected through these fixed events that are apparently necessary to keep their universes stable, and one of the most common ones is the death of a police captain close to Spider-Man, which in Miles's case is his dad. And Miguel isn't just throwing out random theories either. He explains this from personal experience. At one point, he traveled to another universe where that version of himself had died, and he tried taking over his life so he could finally have the family he never got. But after he disrupted that universe's canon, the entire reality started collapsing right in front of him. So, in Miguel's eyes, these events aren't optional. They're cruel, but they're necessary to stop entire universes from falling apart. But Miles does not take that information well. And honestly, fair enough. If somebody told me my dad had to die for multiverse balance, I wouldn't exactly accept it either. But here's where he starts going too far. Because keep in mind, he had already seen what happens when canon gets disrupted. Back in Mumbattan, he saves Inspector Singh during Spot's attack. And almost immediately afterward, the entire dimension starts destabilizing. He literally watched a universe begin breaking apart after a canon event was interrupted. So later, when Miles decides he's going to save his father no matter what, this isn't blind rebellion anymore. He already knows the stakes could be catastrophic. And yet, the second his own father becomes the target, he immediately convinces himself that his situation has to be different. That's the moment where his emotions completely override logic. Because I fully understand why he rejects Miguel's mentality. To him, his father isn't some cosmic sacrifice needed to preserve reality. He's just his dad. But emotionally understandable does not automatically make it right. Because if Miguel is right, then Miles isn't just risking himself anymore. Saving his father could potentially destroy Earth 1610 entirely. His mom, his friends, everybody in Brooklyn, millions of innocent people could all die because he refuses to accept even the possibility that canon might be real. And the craziest part is that his recklessness immediately creates even more problems. Miles escapes Spider Society in such a desperate rush that he jumps into the go-home machine without even thinking things through. He assumes it'll send him back to his universe, except the machine tracks the DNA of the spider that bit him, not Miles himself. So instead of going home, he accidentally gets sent to Earth 42, the universe that Spider originally came from, a world that never got its own Spider-Man and basically collapsed into chaos. Meanwhile, he accidentally leaves his actual universe completely vulnerable while Spot keeps evolving into a multiversal threat. So after all that, Miles doesn't even make it home to save his dad. He just creates even more chaos while putting multiple universes at even greater risk. And look, Miles is not the villain here. Miguel's worldview is clearly being driven by trauma and fear. And the movie intentionally leaves room for the possibility that Miguel could be wrong about canon entirely. But that uncertainty is exactly what makes his decision so dangerous, because instead of slowing down and trying to figure out whether there's another solution, Miles becomes so emotionally convinced that he has to save everyone that he stops considering the consequences altogether. He basically decides he's going to save his dad no matter what, even if the risk could potentially cost millions of innocent lives. And that's what makes this one of the most reckless things any hero has done. Miles lets his fear of loss completely override logic, and in the process, he risks entire universes collapsing just to avoid accepting that he might not be able to save everyone. Miles risked the multiverse trying to save his dad, but Flint Lockwood risked the entire world just for validation.
Bigger is better, right?
Oh, yeah.
Flint is honestly one of those characters you feel bad for at first. The guy spent basically his entire childhood being treated like the weird kid nobody understood. Every invention he made either exploded, caused chaos, or just embarrassed him in public. Even his own dad barely knew how to communicate with him outside of weird fishing metaphors because he genuinely didn't understand how to connect with his son. So when the food making machine finally works and starts making food fall from the sky, it feels deserved. For the first time in his life, people aren't laughing at him. They're cheering for him. The town suddenly sees him as a genius instead of a joke, and that's what makes everything afterwards way worse, because Flint very quickly reaches the point where he knows this machine is becoming dangerous and he still keeps it running anyway. The machine literally has a dangerometer screaming at him that the thing is becoming unstable, basically warning him that this thing could turn into a disaster at any second. And Flint's response is unbelievably reckless. Instead of shutting the machine down or even investigating the problem properly, he decides to ignore the warning signs so he can keep the praise going. He blinds himself to the problem because he's terrified of losing the one thing he spent his whole life wanting: validation. Then the food itself starts mutating. The machine begins dropping terrifying oversized foods bigger than houses, and Flint's own computer straight up tells him the food molecules are dangerously over mutating and becoming unstable. Even his dad, who barely understands science at all, can tell something about this situation is seriously wrong. But due to his lifelong craving for validation and Mayor Shelbourne completely feeding into Flint's ego at the exact wrong moment, everything gets worse. The mayor manipulates him into believing the town will turn against him if the food weather stops.
And no one will ever like you. It's your choice.
And Flint falls for it because this is literally the first time in his life people have treated him like he matters. Then comes the grand opening ceremony, which is probably Flint at his absolute worst. Right before the event, Sam notices a massive atmospheric anomaly forming around the machine and tells Flint to shut everything down before something terrible happens. But Flint is so blinded by fame, pride, and the crowd cheering his name that he completely ignores her. He shuts down Sam's warnings and accuses her of overreacting, choosing his ego over the safety of the entire island instead of listening to the very obvious danger standing right in front of him. And almost immediately, the entire situation turns catastrophic. The machine creates a gigantic food-nado made of giant meatballs and spaghetti that tears through the town, destroying buildings and turning Swallow Falls into a disaster zone. The entire island gets so ruined that the townspeople have to escape on makeshift food rafts just to survive. Like, Flint accidentally triggered a near apocalypse because he didn't want to stop being popular, and this wasn't some sudden accident he couldn't predict. He had warning after warning. His machine warned him. Sam warned him. The mutated food warned him. Even his dad could tell something was wrong. Flint just kept ignoring all of it because he was addicted to finally being admired. Now, to be fair, Flint does eventually fix the problem. He realizes how badly he messed up and risks his life to destroy the machine before the disaster spreads across the planet. But the only reason this story gets a happy ending is because Flint got incredibly lucky, partly because of his spray-on shoes and partly because the people he pushed away still came back to help him anyway. Because realistically, if Flint never stopped that machine, people all over the world could have died from this thing. A lot of people. Flint loses control once validation gets to his head, but Hero loses it the second he finds the man responsible for his brother's death.
Baymax, destroy.
Up until that scene, honestly, Everything Hiro does in this movie makes complete sense. The kid is 14 years old and loses the most important person in his life basically overnight. Tadashi wasn't just his brother, he was Hiro's role model, best friend, and kinda the only person keeping him grounded. So for most of the movie, Hiro's grieving while also trying to convince himself that Tadashi died a hero for a good reason. Then he discovers the truth. The person Tadashi died trying to save, Professor Callahan, is alive. Not only is he alive, but he's been hiding behind a mask the entire time. He faked the accident, stole Hiro's microbots, literally tried to kill Hiro and his friends several times, and acts like Tadashi's death was just some unfortunate side effect of his revenge plan. And man, the way Callahan talks about it makes the whole thing even worse.
Went in there to save you.
That was his mistake.
There's basically zero remorse there. Hiro's standing face to face with the man responsible for his brother's death, and that grief immediately turns into rage. And I get why he snaps, but this is the moment where he crosses a line that almost no hero ever does. When he removes Baymax's healthcare chip, and dude, that moment is genuinely chilling. Because unlike characters like Woody or Flint, whose actions spiral out of control by accident, Hiro's choice here is completely intentional. He looks directly at Callahan and decides revenge matters more than everything Tadashi stood for. Then he commands Baymax to kill him, not stop him, not capture him, kill him. And what makes the scene even darker is who Baymax is supposed to be. Baymax wasn't built as a weapon. He was literally designed to help people. The healthcare chip wasn't just some random piece of programming either. It basically represented Tadashi's kindness, empathy, and everything he believed in. So when Hiro throws that chip out, it almost feels like he's throwing away his brother's morality along with it. That's why the scene hits so hard. Hiro is furious at Callahan for causing the death of an innocent person, but in that moment, he's about to create another one. He becomes so consumed by revenge that he nearly turns Baymax into the exact kind of monster he hates. If the rest of the team hadn't physically stepped in, Callahan probably would have died right there. Hiro would have watched Baymax beat a man to death at 14 years old, and then he would have had to live with that forever. And man, imagine what Tadashi would have thought if he saw it. The guy who created Baymax to save lives. Seeing his little brother use that same invention as a murder weapon, that would have completely broken his heart. Thankfully, Hiro pulls himself back before it's too late. And what I really love is that the movie doesn't end with revenge. By the end, Hiro actually honors Tadashi's legacy instead of destroying it. He chooses to save Abigail, the daughter of Callahan, whom he was trying to get back, finally breaking the revenge cycle. Before, Hiro was willing to use Baymax to take a life, but he ends the movie using him to save one. And that's probably the moment Tadashi would have been proud of him again.